I was standing right there in my own living room, holding a warm cup of coffee, when my son looked around my house like he was inspecting a hotel and said it in the calmest voice, almost bored, like this decision had already been approved somewhere without me. "Your house is big, Mom." He didn't wait. He didn't ask, he kept going. He pointed upstairs, then toward the hallway, already dividing space that wasn't his. "My wife's parents will take the upstairs. Her sister and the kids can stay on the first floor. It just makes sense. We're family, it's your duty to take them in." I swear, for a second I thought I misheard him. I blinked. I looked at the suitcases already sitting near my wall. I looked at the faces behind him, so confident, so relaxed, so sure of victory. And something strange happened inside me. No shouting, no panic, just a deep, quiet stillness. The kind that comes right before a storm or right after you finally understand the truth. I felt my fingers tighten around the mug. My heart didn't race, it slowed. Sigh, that's when I realized this wasn't a conversation, it was an announcement, a verdict. My own home had just been reassigned, and no one had thought to include me in the decision. The room felt heavy, like the air itself was watching me. My son waited, clearly expecting what he'd always gotten from me: agreement, sacrifice, silence. Behind him, his wife avoided my eyes. Her parents stood there like guests who had already checked in. Her sister was already whispering to her kids about rooms. Ha ha ha, even now, remembering it, the audacity almost feels unreal. And there I was, a woman who had worked her entire life, standing in the center of the only place that had ever truly been mine, being told what my duty was. I didn't speak right away. I just looked at my son, really looked at him. And in that moment, something clicked with painful clarity. This wasn't sudden. This didn't start today. This was the end of a very long road I had been walking with my eyes half closed. Because people don't wake up one day and decide to take over your life. They practice first, slowly, quietly, over years, and I had let it happen, thinking I was being loving, thinking I was being a good mother. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable. Someone shifted their weight, someone cleared their throat. My son raised his eyebrows, impatient now, like I was holding up a schedule. He expected resistance maybe, but only the kind that melts with pressure. What he didn't expect was my calm. Calm scares people more than anger ever does. But before I tell you what I said, before I tell you the sentence that made that entire room freeze, you need to understand how we got here. Because this story didn't begin with suitcases in my living room. It began years earlier, the day I became a widow and learned how quickly love can turn into access. My name is Alina, I'm 68 years old. And for most of my life, I believed that if you gave enough, people would eventually give back. I believed that family meant protection, not entitlement. When my husband died, this house became my world. Too big, people said. Too quiet, but to me it was peace. I built routines here. Morning coffee by the window, gardening in the afternoons, silence that didn't hurt anymore. Then my son started visiting more. At first it felt comforting. My boy is checking on me. Weekends turned into weekdays. Short stays turned into longer ones. He worked from my upstairs room sometimes. His wife helped in the kitchen. They acted grateful, respectful. I thought maybe this is what family does. You open your door, you share space, you don't count favors. What I didn't see was the shift. The subtle way my house stopped being mine and started being available. The way suggestions slowly replaced questions. The way "can we" quietly became "we will." And I let it slide. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself I wasn't alone. I ignored the small discomforts because I didn't want conflict, because I didn't want to seem difficult. Funny how women my age were taught that protecting your peace somehow makes you selfish. I laughed things off. I adjusted. I made space. And every time I did, the line moved a little further away from me. Until one day, without asking, without hesitation, my son stood in my living room and divided my home like a prize already won. And standing there, watching him talk about duty, about family, about space that no longer belonged to me, I finally understood something that made my chest ache. This wasn't about helping. This was about control, about assumption. About a belief that my role in this family was to provide quietly and disappear politely, and that realization hurt more than any insult ever could. My son was still talking, explaining logistics, timelines, who would sleep where. I barely heard him. My mind was racing backward through every moment I had ignored, every time I had swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. My coffee had gone cold. The room felt smaller even though it was full. And then he finally stopped talking and looked at me, waiting. That look, I had seen it before, the look that says you'll say yes, you always do, and that's when I knew whatever I said next would change everything. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it, and once you stop playing your assigned role, people panic. Deep sigh, I set the mug down slowly. I lifted my eyes to his face. And in my head, one thought echoed louder than all the others. This ends today. But the reason I was able to say what I said, without shaking, without tears, was because of something that had happened months earlier, something involving money. Something that taught me exactly how my son truly saw me, and that is where this story really begins. After my husband died, this house became quieter than I ever imagined it could. Not the peaceful kind of quiet at first. No, this was the heavy kind, the kind that sits on your chest at night and whispers doubts when the lights go out. I remember standing in the hallway some evenings, listening to nothing at all, wondering if this silence was going to swallow me whole. I had been married for decades. My life had always been shared: meals, plans, small arguments, laughter drifting from room to room. And suddenly it was just me. People assume loneliness makes you weak. It doesn't, it makes you careful. It makes you cling to routines, to stability, to the things you can control. I built my days around small certainties. Morning coffee in the same cup. The garden watered at the same hour. Bills paid on time every time. I told myself I didn't need much, and for a while that was true. Then my son started visiting more often. At first it felt like a blessing. Oh, my boy cares. He would call to check on me, stop by on weekends, sometimes bring dinner. He'd sit at my table and talk about work, about stress, about how hard life was becoming. I listened. I always listened. That's what mothers do, right? I didn't notice when the visits got longer. I didn't question it when he started staying late, then overnight. I didn't say anything when his wife began leaving personal items here, little signs of permanence disguised as convenience. I told myself I was lucky, lucky to have family nearby, lucky not to be forgotten. That's how it starts, not with demands but with presence, with comfort, with familiarity. Slowly my space adjusted to accommodate them. The upstairs room became his temporary office. The kitchen cabinets reorganized themselves without my permission. My schedule shifted around theirs, and every time I felt a small pinch of discomfort, I pushed it down. Ha ha ha, don't be dramatic, I told myself. This is family. What I didn't realize was that love, when unchecked, can quietly turn into access. And access, when repeated enough times, starts to feel like ownership. My son never asked outright. That's the clever part. He'd say things like, "You don't mind, right?" already halfway through doing what he wanted, or "This just makes sense." And I'd nod because objecting felt harder than agreeing. Because I didn't want to seem ungrateful for his attention. Because somewhere deep down, I was afraid that if I said no too often, the visits would stop. That fear kept me silent more times than I liked to admit. Then there was the money. I've always been careful with it. I worked for decades, saved consistently, planned for emergencies. Not because I was greedy, but because I never wanted to depend on anyone, especially not in old age. My son knew this. He knew how disciplined I was, how organized. He admired it, or so I thought. Sometimes he'd joke about it. "Mom, you're better with money than most banks," he'd laugh. I'd smile, not realizing that admiration was slowly turning into calculation. The first time he asked for help, it sounded reasonable. A short-term issue, a tight month, just a little support until things stabilized. I hesitated, but I agreed. Everyone needs help sometimes. He promised he'd pay it back. He hugged me, he thanked me, and when he left, I felt useful, needed. That feeling is dangerous. Because once people realize you'll step in quietly, they start assuming you always will. The next request came faster, with less explanation, less gratitude, sometimes not even a proper ask, just stories about stress, about pressure, about how hard things were. The expectation hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. And again I helped, because saying no felt like betrayal, because I didn't want to be the mother who turned her back. Looking back now, I can see how the balance shifted. Conversations stopped being about me entirely. My health, my plans, my comfort, those topics faded away. Everything revolved around what they needed, what they were dealing with, what solution I could quietly provide. And I let it happen because it was easier than confronting the truth, that my kindness was being repurposed, that my love was being used as leverage. I remember one afternoon sitting alone after they left, staring at the couch cushions slightly out of place, the house smelling faintly of someone else's perfume. I felt tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. I told myself it was normal, that this was just what aging looked like, but deep down a question had started forming, soft but persistent. When did my life become a convenience for others? I ignored it. Until the day I sat down to review my bank statements like I always did. The habit was automatic, a ritual. I didn't expect surprises. That's why my breath caught when I saw the number, a transfer I didn't recognize. My heart skipped. I checked again and again. My hands started to tremble, not from fear but from confusion. This didn't make sense. I hadn't authorized it. I hadn't moved money. I stared at the screen, hoping it was a mistake. It wasn't. That moment, right there, staring at those numbers, was when everything shifted, because the realization that followed was slow, cold, and devastating. The person who had access to my accounts wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a hacker. It was someone who knew my routines, someone who knew my trust, someone who believed my resources were available to him simply because of who he was. Deep sigh, and as that understanding settled in, a heavy truth followed close behind. This wasn't an accident, it was a test, and the next step would be worse, because once someone crosses a line and gets away with it, they don't step back. They stepped forward, and I was about to learn just how far my son believed that line could be pushed. I sat there staring at the screen, my eyes moving back and forth over the numbers like they might rearrange themselves if I looked long enough. No, this can't be right. I refreshed the page. Same transfer, same amount. My heart started to thump, not fast, not wild, but heavy, like each beat landed with weight. I grabbed my notebook where I always wrote things down, dates, bills, reminders, and flipped through it slowly. Nothing. I hadn't moved that money, I knew I hadn't. Sigh, for a brief, foolish moment I hoped the bank had made a mistake, that some stranger somewhere had typed the wrong number. Anything but the thought that was quietly forming in my mind. I called the bank. I remember my voice sounding calm, too calm as if it belonged to someone else. I asked about the transfer. The woman on the line explained patiently, professionally, that the transaction had been made using my own login details. From an IP address registered to my house, I thanked her and hung up, and just like that the room felt smaller, the walls closer, the silence louder, because there was only one person who could have done that. Oh, I sat very still for a long time. I didn't cry, I didn't panic, I just felt hollow. Betrayal doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, slips in like a cold draft and settles in your bones. When my son came by that evening, I didn't greet him at the door like usual. I waited. I sat on the couch, hands folded, the bank statement on the table in front of me like evidence at a trial. He walked in smiling, talking about traffic, about work, about nothing at all. Then he saw the paper. He stopped mid-sentence. His smile faltered just a little. That tiny pause told me everything before he even spoke. "Did you take money from my account?" I asked. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake, it didn't rise. It was flat, controlled, almost gentle. He didn't answer right away. He looked down, rubbed his hands together. Finally, he sighed and said, "Mom, I was going to tell you." Those words, "I was going to tell you," they land like an insult wrapped in politeness. He explained quickly, tripping over his excuses, a legal issue. A payment he hadn't expected, pressure, stress. He said he borrowed, as if money moves itself when it hears a good enough reason, as if permission is optional when family is involved. I listened without interrupting. "That part is important." I let him talk. I wanted to hear how far he'd go. "We're family," he said, finally looking up at me. "I knew you'd understand." Understand, ha, even now that word stings. I asked him when he planned to ask me. He said he didn't want to worry me, that he knew I'd say no, so instead he chose to take. He said it like it was logical, like he had solved a problem efficiently. Deep sigh, that's when I realized something that made my stomach turn. He didn't see what he'd done as wrong, he saw it as practical. He saw my boundaries as obstacles. I told him I wanted the money back, all of it. He nodded quickly, too quickly, promising he'd fix it. Promises fall easily from mouths that don't plan to keep them. I watched his eyes while he spoke. There was no shame there, no fear, just calculation. He left soon after, hugging me on his way out like nothing had changed. I sat alone that night in the dim living room, the house unusually quiet again. But this time the quiet wasn't peaceful, it was alert, watching. I told myself it would be a one-time thing, that he'd repay it, that maybe he really had panicked. Mothers are experts at making excuses for their children. 2 weeks passed, then 3. He visited again, laughed, drank coffee at my table, talked about his plans. Never mentioned the money, not once. It hung between us like a ghost neither of us acknowledged. I waited, I observed. I noticed how easily he slipped back into comfort, how naturally he acted like nothing was owed. One afternoon, I finally asked him again, "When will you return the money?" He looked surprised, almost offended. "Soon," he said. That word, soon, it means everything and nothing. I felt something tighten in my chest. I told him I needed a clear date. I told him I couldn't ignore this. He laughed nervously and said, "Mom, don't be like that. You know I'll take care of it." And that's when I did something that shocked even me. I told him I would take legal action if the money wasn't returned. The room went cold. His face changed. Not fear, anger, disbelief. "You'd really do that? To your own son?" There it was, the guilt weaponized. Family turned into a shield. I told him stealing is stealing, no matter who does it. He left angry that day, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the walls. I didn't chase him. I didn't apologize, and for the first time I felt something strange, relief mixed with grief, because a line had been drawn. The days that followed were silent, no calls, no visits, punishment through absence. Sigh, but I didn't break. I stayed busy, I breathed, and then the phone rang one night, my son again, his tone softer, urgent. He told me his wife's parents were in trouble, rent issues, risk of eviction. He asked for help. Again, I said no, calmly, clearly. And that's when the mask slipped. He told me I was selfish, that I had money sitting there doing nothing, that I didn't need it like they did. Those words hit harder than I expected, because they revealed the truth fully without disguise. To him, my savings weren't my safety. They were unused resources waiting to be claimed. I hung up shaking, not from fear but from clarity. And 2 days later, when I checked my account again, my heart sank. Another transfer. Another amount taken without permission. Again, that was the moment something inside me hardened, not with anger but with resolve, because one theft can be explained away, two is a pattern, and patterns don't stop on their own, they escalate. And I had a terrible feeling that the next thing my son would try to take from me wouldn't be money at all, it would be something far bigger. After the second transfer, I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft ticking of the clock, each second landing like a reminder that something in my life had gone terribly wrong. It wasn't just the money anymore. It was the realization that my own son could look me in the eye, promise one thing, and then quietly do another without a single moment of hesitation. By morning, my body felt heavy, but my mind was sharp, clear, painfully clear. I knew then that this wasn't going to end with apologies or promises. People who cross a line twice don't stop because you ask nicely. They stop only when they face consequences, but before I could even decide what those consequences would be, life gave me another lesson, a public one. The invitation came from my son's wife. Her mother was celebrating a birthday. A small family gathering, she said, just close relatives. I almost declined. Something in my chest tightened when I read the message, but I told myself I was being paranoid. I didn't want to look like the difficult mother-in-law, the cold one who holds grudges, so I went. I wore a simple dress. I brought a gift. I walked into their apartment with a polite smile and a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, things could still be civil. The place was already full when I arrived. Laughter, music, the smell of food, everyone seemed comfortable, familiar. I, on the other hand, felt like a guest who had arrived too early or too late. My son greeted me with a quick hug. His wife smiled, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. Her parents were there, moving around confidently in their own space. I tried to relax. I told myself to just get through the afternoon. For a while it was fine, small talk, cake. Glasses clinking, then her father stood up. He raised his glass and cleared his throat. People quieted down. I felt it before he even spoke. That tightening, that instinct that tells you something is about to go wrong. He started with compliments about his wife, about family, about sticking together in hard times. Everyone nodded along, then his tone shifted, just slightly, enough that you could feel it if you were paying attention. He spoke about generosity, about people who help when help is needed. He laughed, others laughed with him. Then he said it, not my name, not directly, but everyone knew. He talked about people who live alone in big houses with more than enough yet hesitate to help when family struggles. I felt heat rise in my face. My hands went cold. I looked around. Some people avoided my eyes. Others stared openly, curious. He kept going. He praised my son, said he had a good heart, that he understood what family meant, that he was willing to step up even when others wouldn't. Each word landed like a slap wrapped in a smile. I waited for my son to say something, anything, to correct him, to defend me, to stop it. He didn't. He stood there, eyes lowered, silent. That silence hurt more than the insult itself. I smiled politely. I didn't argue. I didn't leave. I sat there, humiliated, feeling smaller by the second, not because of what that man said, but because my own child allowed it. When the toast ended, conversation slowly returned, awkward and forced. I excused myself early. The drive home was quiet, too quiet. My son didn't speak. His wife stared out the window. I watched the streetlights pass by and felt something inside me finally crack. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a clean, sharp break. At home, I got out of the car and turned to my son before closing the door. I told him calmly that the next time someone disrespected me in his presence and he said nothing, it would be the last time he saw me. He looked startled, almost offended, like he hadn't realized how serious this had become. I went inside and locked the door. That night I cried, not loud sobs, just quiet tears soaking into my pillow. Weeping because I wasn't mourning money. I was mourning the illusion that my son would protect me. The days after were silent again. No calls, no messages. I let the quiet settle. I thought about everything that had happened, about the lines crossed, the words unspoken. And slowly, painfully, I understood something I had avoided for too long. When someone shows you that your dignity is negotiable, you either accept it or you walk away. And I wasn't ready to walk away yet, but I was done pretending nothing was wrong. I didn't know it then, but that public humiliation was only preparation. Because the next time my son and his family came to me, they wouldn't come with jokes or speeches. They would come with suitcases, and this time they wouldn't ask at all. After that day, something changed in me, not loudly, not in a way anyone else could see, but inside a switch flipped. I stopped answering calls immediately. I stopped rearranging my day around my son's schedule. I stopped explaining myself. It felt strange at first, like learning to walk on a leg that had been numb for years. And of course, the moment I stopped overgiving, I became the problem. That's how it always works. When people benefit from your silence, your voice feels like an attack. My son noticed the shift quickly. He asked why I sounded distant, why I was cold. I told him the truth calmly. I said I needed space. I said I needed respect. He laughed, not kindly but dismissively, like I'd said something unrealistic. He told me I was being dramatic, that I was holding grudges, that I was making things bigger than they needed to be. Ha ha ha, imagine stealing from someone and then accusing them of overreacting. I told him again that I wanted my money back, a clear answer, a date. He sighed loudly like I was exhausting him. He said I was stressing him out during a difficult time, that his wife was under pressure, that her parents were struggling, that I should be more understanding, more flexible, more supportive, and there it was. The word that always appears when boundaries show up. Selfish. He didn't say it directly at first, he circled it. You live alone, you don't even use all that space. You have savings just sitting there, each sentence chipped away at something deeper. As if my life, my choices, my planning were somehow evidence against me, as if needing less made me owe more. I remember sitting at my kitchen table after one of those conversations, staring at my hands, wondering how I had become the villain in a story where I was the one being hurt. That's the trick of emotional pressure. It makes you question your own reality, makes you wonder if protecting yourself is cruelty. I almost apologized that day, almost, just to make it stop. Just to go back to the version of peace where I was uncomfortable but everyone else was satisfied. But then I remembered that birthday toast, that silence, that second transfer, and something steadied me. I told him no, clearly, calmly. I said I would not give more money. I said I would not ignore what had happened. I said I was done pretending this was normal. The reaction was immediate. His voice changed, sharper, colder. He accused me of choosing money over family, of being heartless, of forgetting what it means to be a mother. Weeping, that part hurt more than I expected, because no matter how old you are, being told you failed as a mother cuts deep. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself, I simply repeated my answer. No, that's when he hung up on me. Days passed. Silence again. This time it wasn't just absence, it was punishment, a way to make me feel guilty. A way to make me miss him enough to give in. And I did miss him, of course I did. He's my son. I missed the version of him I thought I had. I missed the idea of us, but I didn't cave. I focused on my routines, on my garden, on small moments of calm, and slowly I started to feel something unexpected. Relief. Deep sigh, not because the situation was resolved, but because for the first time, I wasn't betraying myself to keep someone else comfortable. A week later, he called again. His tone was softer, almost gentle. He said he was sorry things had gotten tense, that maybe we could move past it. I asked him one simple question. When will you return the money? Silence. Then excuses, then irritation, then the word again. Selfish, that was the moment I understood fully. He didn't want peace, he wanted access, and peace only mattered if it kept the door open. I ended the call politely. I didn't argue. I didn't explain, I just said I wouldn't discuss money anymore unless it was about repayment. Ha ha ha, that boundary must have felt like a locked door to him, because 2 days later, he showed up at my house without warning. He didn't come alone and he didn't come to talk. He came with urgency in his eyes and a story already prepared. His wife's parents, he said, were in trouble, serious trouble. They might lose their place. They needed help, just temporarily. Just a little, I listened quietly. Then I said no. Again, that's when the mask slipped completely. He told me I had changed, that I wasn't the mother he remembered, that I had become bitter, ungrateful, cold. And as he stood there, listing all the ways I was failing him, I realized something so clear it almost made me smile. The moment you stop being useful, you stop being lovable in the eyes of entitled people. And if this story feels painfully familiar, if you're listening right now and thinking, sigh, this sounds like my life, you're not alone. Sometimes hearing someone else's truth helps you recognize your own. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe quietly. No noise, just understanding. He left angry that day, slammed the door. I stood there in the quiet hallway, heart pounding but spine straight. I didn't chase him, I didn't cry. I felt something settle inside me. A boundary doesn't feel powerful at first, it feels lonely, but it also feels clean. I didn't know then how quickly things would escalate. I didn't know that the next time he came, he wouldn't come with words or guilt. He would come with bags, with people, with the assumption that my no was temporary, and that assumption, that would be his biggest mistake. It happened on a quiet afternoon, the kind of afternoon that feels harmless. Sunlight coming through the windows, the house smelling faintly of tea and clean wood, my garden resting peacefully outside. I was sitting with a book, finally relaxed, finally breathing normally again when I heard the sound of a car door slam. Then another, then voices, not one voice, several. Sigh, my body reacted before my mind did. That tight feeling returned, sharp and immediate. I stood up slowly and walked toward the window. What I saw made my stomach drop. Suitcases, real ones, not overnight bags, full, heavy luggage. My son stood near the gate, keys already in his hand. Behind him were his wife, her parents, her sister, and the children, standing there like this was planned, like this was expected, like this was already decided. For a moment I couldn't move, I just watched. No, surely not, but they didn't hesitate. The gate opened, they walked in, into my garden, into my space, like they belonged there, like I was the guest. I stepped outside just as they reached the patio. My son smiled, casual, almost cheerful. "Mom," he said as if he were stopping by for coffee. No apology, no question, just a greeting. My heart pounded, but my voice stayed calm. "What is going on?" I asked. He answered without missing a beat. "There was an issue with their apartment, water damage, mold, it's temporary." "Just a few days," he said it fast, confident, like a salesman closing a deal. His wife stood quietly behind him, eyes down. Her parents looked around my house with interest, not embarrassment. Her sister was already telling her kids not to touch the plants. Ha ha ha, even now the audacity amazes me. I hadn't said yes, I hadn't said anything, and yet they were already here. "We thought it would make sense," my son continued, gesturing broadly. "You have the space, you live alone, it's the logical solution." Logical, that word again, as if emotions, consent, dignity were irrelevant details. As if my home were a problem to be solved instead of a life to be respected. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that comes when shock turns into certainty. This wasn't desperation. This was entitlement, planned, rehearsed. Executed. I looked at each of them slowly, the parents avoiding nothing, the sister hopeful, the children confused, and my son standing there waiting for me to play my part, to sigh, to give in, to open the door wider. I realized then that he truly believed my no was temporary, that all my boundaries were just moods he could wait out, that if he showed up with enough people, enough pressure, enough chaos, I would collapse into agreement. He didn't see a mother, he saw a resource under siege. I asked him one more time quietly, "Did you think to ask me?" He waved his hand dismissively. "There wasn't time, it's an emergency." Family helps family. That sentence landed hard because emergencies don't come with suitcases packed in advance. Emergencies don't arrive with room assignments already imagined. This wasn't help, this was a takeover. I felt my chest tighten, not with fear but with something colder. Clarity. Deep sigh. I thought about every small compromise I had made, every time I had said yes to avoid conflict, every time I had mistaken silence for peace. And I understood that this moment was the result, not of today's decision, but of years of allowing my boundaries to be tested without consequence. My son stepped closer, lowering his voice like he was calming a child. "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be. It's just temporary." Temporary. Everything is temporary when it's not happening to you. I looked at the suitcases again, the children. The confident posture of people who believe resistance has already failed, and something inside me settled completely. The fear was gone, the doubt was gone, even the sadness took a step back because this wasn't a moment for emotion. This was a moment for decision. My son smiled slightly, sensing victory. He took a breath, ready to explain the arrangement, and that's when he said it. The sentence that erased any remaining illusion I had about who he thought I was. The sentence that turned my house into a blueprint and me into an afterthought. He looked around proudly and said, "Your house is big, Mom," and I knew, whatever came next would end this one way or another. "Your house is big, Mom," he said it with a strange confidence like the conclusion of a meeting I hadn't attended. Then he kept going, his voice steady, organized, almost proud of himself. "My wife's parents can take the upstairs. Her sister and the kids can stay on the first floor. Jessica and I will use my old room." He nodded slightly like he had just solved a complicated problem, then he finished it casually, effortlessly. "It's your duty to take them in, we're family." For a moment no one spoke. The air felt thick, heavy, like it had weight. I could hear the children whispering. I could hear the wind moving through the trees. I could hear my own breathing, slow and steady. Something inside me finally went very quiet, not numb, clear, sharp. I realized then that my son wasn't asking for help, he was issuing instructions. He wasn't worried about my feelings. He had already decided they didn't matter. He had reduced my entire life, my work, my sacrifices, my peace, into square footage he could divide. I looked at him. Really looked. At the man standing in front of me who had once needed me for everything and now believed I owed him everything. Behind him, his wife stared at the ground. Her parents exchanged quick glances, already imagining themselves settled in. Her sister smiled nervously like someone waiting to see if the plan would stick. They all watched me, waiting. Measuring, expecting. I felt an odd urge to laugh. Ha ha ha, not because it was funny, but because of how absurd it was. How confidently people will take from you once they decide you don't deserve boundaries. My son mistook my silence for weakness. He took a small step forward, lowering his voice the way he always did when he thought persuasion was needed. "Mom, this is the best solution. You don't even use all the space. You'll still have your routines, nothing really changes. Nothing changes except my privacy, my safety, my dignity." I thought of the nights I lay awake alone, the years I worked without complaint, the money I saved so I'd never have to beg anyone for help. And here he was, standing in my garden, telling me what my duty was. I felt a strange sadness, not for myself but for him, for how easily he had learned to confuse love with entitlement. I took a slow breath. I noticed how my hands weren't shaking, how my voice didn't feel trapped in my throat. This wasn't rage. This was resolve. I understood then that whatever I said next would redraw every line between us. And I also understood that if I didn't say it now, I never would. Silence had already cost me enough. I set my gaze on him and spoke calmly, clearly, without raising my voice. "You're right," I said. "My house is big." His face relaxed instantly. Relief flickered across his expression. Behind him, shoulders loosened. Someone even smiled. They thought they had won. That's the dangerous thing about assumptions. They celebrate too early. I continued, my tone unchanged. "It's big enough for me." The smile on his face faltered. "I built this house. I paid for it. I protected it, and I decide who lives in it." The silence deepened. No one moved. I could almost hear their thoughts scrambling to catch up. My son stared at me, confused now, unsettled. "You don't get to divide my life like rooms on a floor plan," I said, "and you don't get to tell me what my duty is." His mouth opened, then closed. "Mom," I lifted my hand gently. "No," one word, calm, final. Something shifted in the air. Fear, not loud fear, the quiet kind, the kind that arrives when people realize the ground under them isn't solid anymore. His wife finally looked up, eyes wide. Her parents stiffened. Her sister pulled the kids closer. "You assumed I would give in," I continued. "You assumed I would be embarrassed. You assumed I would sacrifice myself to avoid conflict." "You were wrong." My son took a step back. I saw it then, the first crack, the first moment he realized this wasn't a negotiation. "You can take your bags," I said, still calm, still steady, "and you can leave. All of you." The room, my garden, my space felt frozen. No one spoke, no one laughed, no one argued. The confidence they arrived with drained away, replaced by shock. My son looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Because the woman standing there was no longer willing to disappear quietly for anyone, and as I stood there, heart steady, spine straight, I knew this sentence, this moment, would echo far beyond this afternoon. Because once you take your power back, people who fed on your silence don't know what to do next. And what happened after this proved just how unprepared they were. For a few seconds, no one moved. It was as if time itself had paused to see what would happen next. The children stopped whispering. The breeze through the trees felt louder than before. My son stared at me, his mouth slightly open, like the words hadn't reached his brain yet. He truly believed this was a misunderstanding, that if he explained again, if he pressed a little harder, I would fold. He laughed softly, nervously. "Mom, you're not serious," he said. "Don't do this, you're embarrassing everyone." Embarrassing, that word again, the favorite weapon of people who are afraid of boundaries. I met his eyes and answered evenly, "I've never been more serious." His wife finally stepped forward, her voice small, unsure. "Eleanor, please, it's only for a short time." I turned to her, not unkindly, but firmly. Nothing that begins with entitlement ends quickly. Her parents exchanged irritated looks. Her father crossed his arms. "After everything your son has done for us," he said. That sentence snapped something cold and sharp inside me. "Using my money without my permission is not doing something for you," I replied. The air changed. Suddenly they understood, not emotionally but strategically. They realized this situation was slipping out of control. My son's face hardened. "You're choosing this house over your own child," he said, his voice rising. Weeping, that one hurt. It always hurts when truth is twisted into guilt, but I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I simply answered, "I'm choosing respect over being used." He shook his head in disbelief, pacing slightly. "You can't just throw us out," he said. "We have nowhere to go." I nodded once. "That should have been considered before you arrived without asking." There was anger now, real anger. His wife's parents started speaking over each other, complaining, accusing. The sister pulled the children closer, whispering urgently. Chaos bloomed where certainty once lived, and through it all I stayed still. Calm is terrifying when people expect panic. My son stepped closer again, lowering his voice, trying a different tactic. "Mom," he said softly, "let's talk about this privately." That old move, separate me from witnesses, wear me down quietly. I smiled sadly. "Oh, there is nothing private about disrespect," I said. His eyes widened. He didn't recognize this version of me, and that scared him. "You don't mean this," he said again, almost pleading now. "You'll regret it." I looked at him for a long moment. "I already regret what I allowed," I said. "This is me fixing it." Silence fell again, heavy. His wife's mother scoffed. "You're cold," she said. "Heartless." I turned to her. "No," I said calmly. "I'm done." Those two words carried more weight than any argument. My son looked around, searching for support. None came. His wife avoided his eyes. Her parents hesitated. The plan had collapsed. The confidence they arrived with dissolved into confusion. He finally snapped. "Fine," he said sharply. "If you want to destroy your family, go ahead." He grabbed a suitcase and stormed toward the gate. His wife followed slowly, torn, looking back at me with tears in her eyes. Her parents muttered insults under their breath. The sister hurried the children along. One by one they left. The sound of luggage wheels scraping against the ground felt unreal. When the gate finally closed behind them, the quiet that followed was different. Not tense, not empty, clean. I stood there alone in my garden, my hands trembling slightly now that the danger had passed. deep sigh, I sat down slowly, feeling the weight of everything hit me at once. I had done it. I had said no, really no. The kind of no that doesn't apologize, the kind that redraws your life. Part of me felt grief. Of course it did. You don't sever illusions without mourning them, but underneath that grief was something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I went inside and locked the door. I checked the windows. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the table, staring at the walls that were mine again. My heart was still pounding, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline, survival. I thought about my son, about how angry he looked, how betrayed, and for a moment doubt crept in. Was I too harsh? That doubt is the echo of old conditioning, the voice that tells women to soften, to sacrifice, to fix. I let it pass. Because I knew the truth, this wasn't cruelty. This was consequence. That night I slept deeper than I had in months. The house was quiet again, but this time the quiet felt safe, protected. And when I woke up the next morning, sunlight spilling through the windows, I understood something important. That confrontation wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Because when you stop being available, people who depended on your availability don't just walk away quietly. They react, and what came next would test me in ways I never expected. The days after they left were strangely calm, almost too calm. No ringing phone, no surprise visits, no footsteps that weren't mine. I woke up that first morning and lay in bed for a moment listening, just birds outside. The soft hum of the house settling. Sigh, I hadn't realized how tense I'd been until the tension was gone. I made my coffee slowly, without rushing, without bracing myself for interruption. I sat by the window and drank it while the sunlight warmed the floor, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something bad to happen, but peace always comes with a shadow. Grief. Because when the noise stops, the truth gets loud. I missed my son, not the man he had become, but the boy he used to be. The one who ran through this house barefoot, laughing, who used to hug me tightly when he had nightmares. That version of him felt very far away now. I wondered if I'd ever see it again, or if I had finally accepted that it no longer existed. The phone stayed silent for days, then weeks, no apology, no explanation. Just absence, and that absence hurt, even as it healed me. Healing often feels like loss at first. Friends noticed the change in me. They said I looked lighter, calmer. One of them joked that I finally looked like I was living in my own house again. I laughed softly, but the truth behind it was heavy. I had spent so many years managing other people's comfort that I had forgotten what my own felt like. Slowly, I filled my time with things that belonged only to me: long walks, books I'd meant to read, gardening without interruption. The quiet stopped feeling lonely and started feeling earned. Still, at night, doubts crept in. Was I too harsh? Did I go too far? Those questions never come during the day. They come when you're tired, when memory gets soft around the edges. I let myself feel them without answering. Because deep down I already knew. Then one afternoon my son called. His voice sounded tired, smaller. He told me things had fallen apart, that his marriage was strained, that money was gone. That the people he'd tried so hard to please were disappointed in him now. He didn't apologize, he didn't ask how I was, he just talked, and I listened. Sigh, when he finished, he waited. I could hear it in his breathing. Waiting for rescue, waiting for me to fix it. I didn't. I told him I hoped he found his way. I told him I loved him, and I told him I would not be stepping in again. He was quiet for a long time, then he hung up. That was the last time we spoke. Months passed. Seasons changed. The house settled into a new rhythm. My savings stayed untouched. My space stayed mine. I heard through others that my son struggled, that he blamed me. That he told people I had chosen a house over family. Ha ha ha, people tell stories that protect them from facing their own choices. I didn't correct him, I didn't defend myself, I didn't need to. The truth didn't require my participation anymore. One evening, sitting in my garden as the sun went down, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude, not for the pain but for the clarity it forced on me. I realized I hadn't lost my family that day. I had lost the illusion that love means unlimited access. I had lost the belief that sacrifice is always noble, and in exchange I gained something far more valuable: self-respect. That realization settled deep, steady, unshakable. I knew then that no matter what happened next, I would never again shrink myself to keep someone else comfortable, and that understanding prepared me for the final lesson this story had to offer. Because protecting your peace doesn't end with one decision, it's something you choose again and again, and I had one last thing to say about that. Time has a way of softening the sharpest edges, not by erasing what happened but by teaching you how to carry it without bleeding. Months turned into a year, and my life slowly became quiet in a way that felt chosen, not forced. I learned to enjoy mornings without dread, evenings without tension. I stopped flinching when my phone rang. I stopped rehearsing conversations that never came, and somewhere along the way, I realized something simple but powerful. I was no longer waiting for my son to change. I had changed. People like to ask me now, usually in hushed voices, if I regret what I did. if I wish I'd handled things differently, if I'd softened my words, if I'd tried harder. I understand the question. We're taught that a good mother absorbs everything, forgives endlessly, endures quietly, but I've learned that endurance without respect is just slow self-destruction. And I had destroyed enough of myself already. I still love my son. That never disappeared. Love doesn't vanish just because you draw boundaries, but love also doesn't mean allowing yourself to be emptied out. I can love him and still protect myself. I can miss him and still refuse to be used. Those two things can exist at the same time. That truth took me a lifetime to learn. Some nights I sit in the same living room where he once stood and told me what my duty was. The room feels different now, safer, like it belongs to me again. I think about how easily I once confused peace with silence, how often I told myself this is just how families are. Ha ha ha, families aren't supposed to make you feel small. Love isn't supposed to come with fear. And sacrifice isn't noble when it's demanded instead of offered. I don't know where my son's life will take him. I don't know if he'll ever truly understand what he lost that day. That's his journey now, not mine. My responsibility ended the moment I stopped being treated like a person. What I do know is this. My life did not end when I said no. It began again. If you're listening to this and something inside you feels tight, if you've ever been told that your boundaries are selfish, if you've ever been made to feel guilty for protecting what you worked for, deep sigh, you're not wrong. You're not cruel, you're not heartless, you're just done being invisible, and your own life peace is not something you beg for, it's something you defend, quietly, firmly, without apology. And once you do, you'll be surprised by how strong you actually are. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, reflect, or simply feel understood, subscribe to the channel. More stories like this are waiting. Sometimes hearing the truth through someone else's voice makes it easier to claim your own, and as for me, I wake up every morning in my house, my home, my space, with no one telling me what I owe, and that is enough.